Welcome back. Lots to talk about when it comes to political stories today, from Ray Novak's denials about knowing about Nigel Wright's check to the question of the deficit, to deficit or not if you become Prime Minister. Certainly, those have been the hot topics on the campaign trail. And here in our candidates panel to debate them, joining us from Toronto is Liberal candidate Bill Blair and Conservative candidate Paul Calandra. We're hoping to have the NDP's Peggy Nash join us shortly, but we're going to start with you, Mr. Calandra, because the big story today is that Ray Novak has spoken for the first time. He has come out and said he did not know about that check that Nigel Wright wrote. That conflicts with what we heard from Ben Perrin. Who do you believe?
Look, Mercedes, there's obviously contradictory testimony at a trial, but ultimately Mr. Perrin is not on trial. Mr. Novak, to the best of my knowledge, hasn't even been called as a witness to testify in this trial. This is a trial about the actions of Mike Duffy, what he did, and that's what this case is about, and that's what it'll continue to be about.
But doesn't this go to the question of credibility and what the Prime Minister's office knew?
Look, the case itself is about Mr. Duffy. It's about his actions. It's about him taking expenses which he was not entitled to, in our opinion, and in the Crown's opinion. And that's what this is about. It's not about contradictory evidence. I'm not sure how any of the evidence that we heard will impact either favorably for Mr. Duffy or against Mr. Duffy. But ultimately, that'll be up to the judge to decide. But this is about, I believe, 31 charges of fraud against Mr. Duffy. He's on trial, and that's where the focus, I think, should be.
Okay, Bill Blair, you're a former police chief. Contradictory evidence and testimony here. What's your thoughts? Are the voters going to care about that?
Well, I can understand completely why someone would want to maintain the focus only on the criminal trial, but quite frankly, there's a very significant story behind this. And it is very clear that people in the Prime Minister's office conspired together to deceive Canadians, to misrepresent a set of facts to Canadians. And quite frankly, that in and of itself, Canadians have a right to expect integrity and honesty from their government. And when very senior officials in the Prime Minister's office are conspiring together to deceive Canadians, and that culture of deception, I think, is on full display in the trial, because we're seeing contradictory evidence that's given under oath, and documentary evidence that tells one story, and then somebody being chased through a parking lot telling an entirely different story. And I think Canadians have every right to question what's the truth and what was going on in their government. And I understand the importance of the criminal trial. I've been through many of those. But I think there's important questions that need to be answered, and Canadians have a right to the truth, to know what was going on in their government and why they were being deceived.
Peggy Nash, what was your reaction to Ray Novak's comments to Bob Fife today, denying that he knew about that check?
Well, you know, does anybody really believe that none of the people around the Prime Minister read their emails or knew what was going on? I think it's clear for Canadians that it's the Prime Minister that's on trial here, and I think Canadians are judging him accordingly. But let me just take a quick opportunity and ask Mr. Blair, a senior member of the Toronto Police Department, was found guilty for his actions during the mass arrests of the G20. Now,
okay,
you
Peggy,
said in the Globe and Mail that you said that you were in charge, you directed
Peggy,
that. I'd like to know if you're going to take responsibility for your actions during the G20.
Okay, Bill, I'm going to give you an opportunity to answer it because it was asked.
Yeah, thanks. Peggy, as I know you are already aware, there was exhaustive reviews and reports that were submitted that explained in detail all of the chronology of events that took place over the course of that weekend, and those questions have been very fulsomely answered. The hearing that concluded this week was directed by me. It was under my authority. I appointed an independent judge to hear that case, and I also appointed former Crown attorney.
Well, you said you're responsible for the actions that weekend. Will you take responsibility for your
Peggy,
actions and the biggest civil rights trampling in Canadian history?
Well, Peggy, the question is that this is a 5-year-old event, and all of those things have been answered. Quite frankly,
I don't think Canadians feel that.
Well, perhaps you don't, but I know the people that I've spoken to in my city, and I have been their police chief for 10 years. I answered their questions. I kept the city of Toronto one of the safest large cities in North America, and I have been fully accountable to the civilian oversight that I was responsible to and to the people that I have served.
It'd be great if you took responsibility for your actions then.
So, Peggy, we're going to switch gears now. We're talking about the deficit. I want to talk about this because it's something your leader is promising that he's going to balance the budget, and that's realistic. We have new numbers today. Take a look at those numbers that have come in. These are numbers from the Fiscal Monitor and Finance Canada. $5 billion surplus over the first quarter of June of 2015. Budgetary surplus of $1.1 billion between April to June of 2015, and a budgetary surplus of $5 billion after that. It's down a little bit from last year, but with all the various leaders staking out where they're going to be on this, a little strange, Paul, that the Prime Minister didn't seem to take much of an opportunity to talk about this today.
Well, look, Mercedes, we've said right from the beginning that we had a balanced budget, that it was important that Canada continue with a balanced budget, and contradict that to what we've been hearing from the other two throughout this debate. You know, when Mr. Trudeau first started, his stump speech included references to the fact that he didn't actually believe that external events like what was happening in Greece or China would have an impact either on the global economy or the Canadian economy. He's dropped that. He then said, you know, he'll grow the economy from the heart. I have no idea what that means. But now he's talking about multi-billion-dollar deficits for many, many years. Not only that, he's talking about increasing taxes on all Canadians, a payroll tax, where people making $60,000 a year pay an extra $1,000, and an employer who has to make that decision whether to hire somebody or not is looking at a new tax of $1,000 as well. Mr. Mulcair, for his part, look, we know what he's talking about. He's talking about a massive carbon tax. In their last campaign, they budgeted a $21 billion worth of revenues through a carbon tax. He isn't coming forward yet with the amount, but we've seen both of them make multi-billion-dollar promises with no ability to keep those promises. We know how the Liberals would do it. Huge payroll taxes. They want to cancel the universal child care benefit. The NDP want to bring in a carbon tax. We're the only party that's talking about cutting taxes for all Canadians, putting more money back in their pockets, balancing the budget, and growing the economy. Look, when these two are out there campaigning, Mr. Blair, I can't believe that you're hearing from people that they want to lose a universal child care benefit, or that they actually want to pay a payroll tax of an extra $1,000. And I find it hard to believe that, Peggy, you're hearing that from your constituents as well. What I'm hearing is people want a balanced budget, they want more money in their pockets, and they're excited by the direction that we're going in, and that's what we're going to continue to do in the Canadian economy.
Okay, Bill, I want to ask you, because your leader is the one promising that he could run a deficit for a few years. He says it's just 3, but when the Ontario provincial Liberals promised that, well, I mean, they still haven't balanced the budget. Is it a dangerous precedent to set, or is he being honest?
No, I think our leader is being honest, and he's being bold, and he is prepared to make investments that are going to change the future of this country and build a better quality of life for all of its citizens. You know, I also want to correct a mistaken comment that was just made. You know, the Liberal Party is the only party that has promised a substantial tax cut for millions of Canadians in the middle class and people who aspire to be in the middle class. And I'll tell you, Paul, when I'm out on the door knocking on those doors and talking to people, they're not at all concerned by the Liberal plan, but they're deeply concerned about your commitment and Mr. Mulcair's commitment to give money to millionaires who, quite frankly, don't need it.
Give me a break, Bill. You're going out to your doorsteps and you're telling me?
To make your statement, and you're going to let me finish mine.
Go ahead, Bill. I think it's important that people hear what you're talking. So please go ahead.
But the Liberal plan is to return money to the middle class and those to aspire to be in the middle class, to make their lives easier, and it puts a great deal more money into the economy through the middle class. We're also going to ask those who are making more than $200,000 a year, who've prospered very well in the current economy, to pay a little bit more. And the people that I'm talking to in my riding are very pleased about that. And they're also pleased that the infrastructure plan that is being brought forward by Mr. Trudeau, that is going to essentially nearly double the amount of investment that's made in infrastructure and public transit. I've got people all over Scarborough who spend hours waiting for an overcrowded bus when it finally arrives, to go along potholed roads and live in crumbling housing infrastructure. And we're talking about making significant investments in public housing, in child care spaces, in public health, that is going to make a difference for the quality of people's lives in communities right across this country.
You know, if
Peggy,
I could have even just a few seconds
here. Your leader is promising to
here.
balance the budget.
Yeah. Well, we're seeing with these results released today, they're just first quarter results. I think Canadians know we're in uncertain times, but I think Canadians also know that this government's plan has failed, that they're working harder than ever and they can't get ahead. But I do believe, and our leader believes, that you can, with a prudent government, both have a balanced budget and address the priorities of Canadians. But if I can just have equal time here.
Thanks.
You know, the Liberals had majority governments.
But we thank you very much, and we thank all of our candidates on the panel for joining us today.
Thanks, Mercedes.
Thank you, Mercedes.